One of the most important responsibilities of parents, of teachers, of pastors, of leaders who are speaking authoritatively into the lives of others is teaching people how to think. Sometimes when we start going into this direction, people are like, oh, here we go again, or this is just too deep. Or,
another critical thinking episode?
Yeah. And yet I can't get past it, Josh. I mean, you do this, this is your career.
Yeah, this is my job. Yeah.
Yeah. And to some extent I do too, with a heavier dose of theology, perhaps, and you're using perhaps more logic and science and
philosophy and psychology, a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
But all of them are also part of the tapestry that is advanced thinking.
Yeah.
Was it, who was it that said theology is the queen of all the sciences? Who was it?
I don't know. I hadn't heard that one.
Was it Newton? I think it was Newton said theology is queen of all the sciences. And so because naturalism has tried to completely divorce itself from theology, so we're driving down the highway with one flat tire as far as I'm concerned. Because if you don't consider the implications of theology, whether it's Judeo-Christian or some other theology, you're not completing the philosophical orb, so to speak. But what I want to do today, and my name is Dan. I'm one of the teaching pastors at Life Fellowship in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina, and you're listening to Life Talks. I'm with Josh Brahm, who is our producer, but he's far more than a producer. He's just a techie guy, but he's one of the smartest guys I know, and he is the head of the Equal Rights Institute, and he travels to college campuses and to friendly groups and hostile groups to present a biblical worldview on the matter of life, but well beyond that as well. So Josh, thanks for agreeing to converse with me on this.
Anytime. This is fun.
Yeah. So what I want to do is kind of ask, what are the big questions of philosophy? What are the big questions that in a postmodern world that we grapple with? Because all of these, it's kind of like a trickle-down effect, I think. If you don't believe in objective truth, the consequences of that affect your thinking and then ultimately affects your actions.
Yes.
So what I want to do is kind of just spend 20 minutes or so just talking about what are some of the big questions that we should be grappling with? What are the questions that we should be able to reasonably give a response to that will change the trajectory of what we believe to be true and how we apply that into our real life?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
What are a bunch of big foundational questions? And you've got a list more than like 5 here. So we've got a bunch of different questions. And so it could be that I imagine a lot of our listeners have at least considered a bunch of these. I bet a bunch of our listeners haven't maybe seriously considered all of them. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see.
And we're not going to try to give you an answer in 60 seconds for each of these. That would be an exercise in futility, and actually it would be a disservice because these are not 60-second answers.
Yeah, these are hard questions.
These are hard questions, but we think everybody should be thinking about them.
Yes. You shouldn't just go through life just kind of like hoping that you were born in the right family or the right church and that you just like believe all the right things. You should be like considering... Yeah,
but I also, I like to call my students up when we start this because, I'm going to be teaching something similar to this in a month to a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds from all over the world.
That's really cool.
And, there'll be some when I start introducing the topic, you can see them glaze over.
Yeah.
What's this have to do with my real life? Yeah. But I approach them this way. I said, you understand that the kid who's fishing on the banks of the Amazon River are not thinking about this. The kid who lives in a hut and he's never had electricity in his house is not thinking about this. But you're not that kid. Yeah. You're this kid, and you grew up in the West, and you grew up in a Christian home, or you grew up in a, you're going to go, this is for a gap year program, but the next year you're going to go to Ivy League school. You got to wrestle with this because this is where you live, not necessarily everybody else lives. Yeah. So that's kind of what our listeners, I would say to them as well is, okay, you're listening to this podcast that makes you intelligent, smart, good looking, and successful just because you're
right.
But no, you have a responsibility to think about these. So let's jump into it. The first one has to the nature of what is really real. What is the ultimate reality? Yeah. Why do you think that ought to be something we grapple with?
Well, if you don't know it's real, then I guess I just don't know where else you can go. This feels like the ultimate a priori question. Like it's the question is going to come before all of the others. It's going to have all of the subsections of reality that we're going to talk about are going to, it just seems like by nature, be subordinate to reality itself.
Yeah, I mean, because it has to do with everything from origins to senses to a God, any kind of God, which would be part of the origins thing. And this is really important. Of course, even today they're always looking for a way around the fact that there has to be a creator, has to be a God. One of the things I'm surprised at how many of my Gen Z friends talk about are we in a simulation? Have you heard that much on your college camps?
Yeah, I haven't. So my conversations, I haven't had a lot of conversations with people about whether or not we're in simulations. I did talk to a solipsist once. Is that the right word? Meaning that he only believed in his own existence, and he did not believe in mine or any other existence around him. So I ended up having a really kind of bizarre conversation where I'm literally in my hands against the tree, and I'm like, you don't agree with me about the tree, like that kind of. But that's a pretty extreme situation.
Would that be like an outgrowth of existentialism?
Something like that is, or maybe just so much skepticism. He's skeptical of basically all reality except for his own existence. It seemed like a philosophically paralyzing place.
Yeah,
I'm sure there are smarter versions of that view than who I talked to, but no, I haven't talked to a lot of people who thought we were in the Matrix simulation theory or something like that.
Yeah,
I know that came up a lot more after the Matrix came out, like in philosophy departments. Suddenly more and more, papers are being kind of written about the epistemologically, could we even figure out if we're in a simulation? I just haven't had a lot of firsthand conversation with people on that.
And I don't, and again, we're not trying to give any answers to it, but I think people need to be aware that there are some people asking these questions in some pretty influential spots, and they gain kind of a pop culture audience from kids who have grown up playing Sims or, some kind of simulation game. And it's not as big a leap for them to and if they've watched The Matrix, which I happen to be a big fan, particularly the first one, but I watched all three of them. The fourth one was garbage, but they made me think on levels I'd never thought before, which is always a sign to me of good art.
But it's also coming from a completely deterministic worldview where free will is completely an illusion. And so then if you've got people sort of like, okay, well, then maybe my worldview ought to be based on that, then not only are you going to maybe think that we are in a simulation, but you're also at least probably going to be influenced by this idea that, look, we can't control anything in the end. The end is determined for us.
Yeah, and even then, I red pill, blue pill, or whatever. But I have to ask, well, who wrote the program? I mean, it always points me toward God. So if we are a simulation, if we are a computer simulation, if we're trapped in some kind of AI, matrix of computer programs and ones and zeros, somebody still had to put it together. Yeah.
So I don't think that would be persuasive to the kind of young college student that I'm thinking of, because here's what I imagine that they would say back. I imagine they would say back, okay, but if God set us up in a simulation instead of the typical Christian worldview would be that God actually wanted to create people that he could have a relationship with, and what they're doing is real and has real consequences. Suddenly if God put us all in the Matrix, it makes so much less sense to me. And so I wonder if sometimes it would be better to sort of, instead of trying to figure out, could Christianity kind of work within that, be I just don't think that idea makes as much sense. And unfortunately, and I know we're not going to try to give answers, but in the end, philosophically, that one is an unsolvable, you can't actually prove.
Right.
Whether or not we're in a simulation. So it becomes an exercise in futility.
Which a lot of philosophical discussions end up there anyway.
Right, but this one gets there real fast.
Yeah, it does. Takes a shortcut. So let's go to another one. What is the nature of truth? And this one's like a no duh. Yeah. I mean, this is what philosophers have been discussing since the beginning of philosophy, so to speak, and it goes back to the book of Genesis.
So let's define our term. So when you say objective truth, I'm going to assume that you mean more than just something like true or false statements about whether or not, right now you're wearing a blue shirt and I happen to, I'm wearing a black shirt. There's a true statement there.
Yeah.
But I think you're even going beyond that to talking about there are objective moral truths, that there are things that are objectively morally right or wrong, and it's not relative in a sense of, you can decide whether something's right or wrong or something like that.
Correct. That they exist outside of time. They exist outside of
our opinion
Yeah,
or
yeah,
popular opinion.
Absolutely that. Yeah. So that's and a lot of people say, well, yeah, I believe in objective truth, but their actions say, no, you don't really believe in objective truth, or because your behavior says that you believe in, a more subjective, situational, pragmatic, or whatever application of truth.
Right.
And I think it's good for people to, from time to time, point out and confront us with our own hypocrisy between what we say, particularly in Christianity, between what we say and what we do. And that's, how we conduct our business to how we vote. We've learned to talk the talk, but when it comes to walking the walk, we stink at it.
Yeah.
And that gives thinking people who are discerning and critical thinkers themselves the opportunity to dismiss our thoughts because we are hypocrites.
Yeah.
But we're all hypocrites.
And then the question becomes like, okay, so is it that you don't actually believe those things that you say, or is it just, or do you believe them and you're just not willing to live them out? And when you ask people who are sort of outside the church looking in and are maybe not looking in with a particular gaze of like, boy, I sure want to be part of that club, but kind of like a much more skeptical eye, it's pretty obvious to them. It's like, yeah, I don't know if I want to be part of a thing where it seems like you're all saying that you believe that there are things that are objectively right and wrong, but then when I look at your behavior, it sounds like you kind of just going to kind of do whatever you want to do or whatever you can get away with or something like that.
Yeah, and I would say that's why the majority of Christians, evangelicals, buy into this dualistic moral therapeutic deism. Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's basically they want all of what they want. They want
it's the Thomas Jefferson like version of theology, right? We're going to cut out
what we
the
don't
parts
like.
We don't like, and we're going to
So therefore we're continue rewriting truth to fit our preferred definitions and dispositions, and so, but if you ask questions, the right questions of this generation, you'll find that an overwhelming majority would subscribe to the buffet approach to what is ultimate truth, what is absolute truth, and so on. So okay, so the nature of truth, what is ultimate theology or reality? The third thing is what about humanity? What is the nature of humanity? Are we the product of a billion years of evolution, or are we special? Are we unique? And what the unique qualities that are observable in humanity, like creativity and sophisticated
rational
thinking, those kind of things. Where did that come
morally?
Where did that come from? Is it a product of evolution? Is it and where will it eventually lead us? So the nature of humanity.
Yeah.
So in that, do you see? You're on secular universities. I mean, what percentage of people are going to just basically see us as an extension of a process that has been going on since before we measure time?
I mean, obviously I've never done polling, so I'm not even going to guess a percentage, but I would imagine it is fairly low on a college campus. How many people would assume? I would at least assume this. I think probably the percentage of college students who believe in young Earth creationism is probably pretty low. I think you see some people who are Christian kind of old Earth people, Christian evolution crowd, theological evolution crowd. Certainly have a lot of just non-theistic, would just believe in some version of evolution. So I'd say that's I imagine certainly the most common. But of course, Christians come to campus too, and there's a lot of young Earth Christians.
Yeah, but I also see a lot, particularly. I see them shift, and I'm old enough to watch the shift occur, but a lot of freshly minted university students have become quite comfortable with the pragmatic dualism that says, okay, Christian Dan believes this, but if I want to get into a good medical school and want to be able to get a good appointment to this field, I must act like I believe this. And so this gives us the moral dual moral deism. So it's an outgrowth of that. But in the end, it is you got to choose at some point. That's my argument. And often when they get older, the weight of their experience and their learning and so forth requires them to say, hey, this is not chance. Chance is not a sufficient answer, or evolution alone is not a simple,
I wonder how much of it is like, is students go to college and it's really the first opportunity to find out this is the rubber meets the road. What do you
and sometimes
really
first time to be exposed to something that their parents weren't controlling.
Yes, exactly. And so I wonder how much are we sort of seeing kind of like this is sort of this natural thing that happens there are a lot of students that maybe they were going to church because they were in their family, they were going along with what the family did, maybe they were going to youth group. But maybe it didn't set in. I mean, so it's been interesting talking to relativists on college campuses in the last 10, 20 years. And I'll never forget a story that my brother told me after doing campus outreach for several different times at Arizona State University. For some reason, there were a lot of moral relativists at Arizona State University to the point, and he kind of got stuck.
Which, by the way, the research from the moral, the part about the information I just quoted on the moral deism or dualistic, that came out of that same community.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, Arizona Christian University, which is located right next to it.
So Tim's talking to relativists all day, and he eventually kind of started asking deeper questions and like, who are you? Where did this come from? And he was talking to a lot of ex-Catholics. He was talking to a lot of kids who had been in youth group or confirmation class before and had asked a couple of good questions and had basically been told to shut up, which is what a lot of youth group and confirmation class leaders do. And now as a result, it's like they not only are they outside the church, they don't even believe in truth. Yeah, like this so far outside, and so we need to show them the opposite.
Yeah, and I hear that all the time too. But we're not the only people that do that. And that's the other thing, because in most universities, if you were to try to make a case for life or whatever, you're going to be told to shut up. So at an early age, a lot of us are learning, depending upon our context and environment, we're learning to self-censor. But self-censorship, as we all know, is not permanent. At some point, we're going to speak out loud what we're thinking, right? So this is my hope, actually. For instance, I read research this week that said the rise of the nuns has peaked and is now falling.
Oh, sorry. I for some reason in my head I still go to N-U-N. I don't know why.
Not Catholic
nuns. The N-O-N, yes.
That we don't believe in anything.
We don't believe in a certain religion.
Right. So there was a phenomenon in the early 2000s, and it peaked recently within the next year or two. They don't know for sure because the research isn't that far out. But it looks like kids are no longer abandoning their faith at the rate that they were, and that in fact it is leveled and now going back the other direction, which gives me a lot of hope. And I've always myself said that I believe this is what's going to happen because of pendulums. They happen all the time. Yeah. But it's kind of like, you and I are both parents. You had 3 and I have 4 kids. And, there's this stage where, you're dressing your kids and you put them in all these ridiculous outfits and take pictures of them and so forth. But at some point they learn how to undress themselves. Yeah. And that's a rather freeing experience for the kids, because they may start by kicking off their shoes, and then it's their socks. Then they get the shirt off. And the next thing you know, they're running around your house naked. Yeah. And there's freedom in that. There's fun. They giggle, they run from you and so forth. Eventually, though, you don't see a lot of 17-year-olds running around naked. They learn, I got to put the clothes back on. So a lot of our young people, they get to this point in life, 17, 18 years of age, they go off to school, and they realize mom and dad did not get to dress me up and take pictures of me the way they want me to be. Yeah. And so they start undressing. And some of that is literal. They lose their, they start sleeping around and living promiscuously, or they start drinking and they start doing that. But at some point, eventually, they have to grow up. Yeah. And when they do, they start putting the things that they threw off back on. The problem is, if you've raised your kid naked, they don't know what to put back on, or they're going to put on something weird. Yep. And I'm probably stretching this analogy way past its expiration date.
But to close the loop, just to make sure everyone's tracking with the dots here, if you teach your kids apologetics and answers to the tough questions, then you are giving them those clothes.
You're giving them a wardrobe
full of options
from which they can choose. That's why, in the passage in Proverbs, it says, train up a child in the way he should go. That's not a promise, it's a principle. But what you're basically doing is preparing the return trip. Yeah. By giving them the trellis that they can return to and grow up in the right way. Yeah. Well, we're not going to get to all of the questions. I didn't expect to, but I do want to hit this next one, Josh, because you kind of touched on it before, but that is, where does morality come from? What is the foundation for morality? Because, there's a strong argument that many people want to make that says, morality is transient. It changes, it shifts. There's a dynamic of popular opinion that the things that go to it. So, one of the questions that it's important, I think, for us to begin discussing with our emerging leadership of our young people is, where does morality, where does right and wrong come from? Where that internal conscience and the external existence of things that we would want from a civilized people.
How do we tell right from wrong, and maybe even, at least by the time they get to school, but by the time they get to university, maybe making sure that they have a sense of kind of what are the common answers to that, right? Because there are ways that Christians respond to the question of kind of how do we ground what's right and wrong? If we believe that we have an intelligent lawgiver, right? So we're coming from a kind of a deontological ethics place, but there are a lot of people that are coming from either moral relativism, which we talked about earlier. There's also a lot of, and I think this is increasingly so on college campuses, also a lot of utilitarians, or people who believe in some form of consequentialism, which would basically say that it's that there are objective right and wrong. They would say that things like sexual assault are objectively wrong. They just are not pointing to God as the grounding for that. They're pointing to, maybe it's a brute fact of the universe. But in the end, like, they're looking towards what is causing the most suffering, or creating the most utility. And so they would say, like, hey, if there are things that are going to cause a whole bunch of suffering, then that's how we know that something is objectively wrong. And your kids should know, like, they're going to hear that. And those answers, they get right answers sometimes. They get a lot of wrong answers sometimes, like a bad compass does. But
So this is one of those topics, Josh, that, our kids are really having to struggle with, because there's a tension that exists in, our hearts and in the conversation that's commonly occurring in the culture, that really says, where do we get a basis of morality? What, you don't expect me to be perfect in every way, or don't things change? I mean, years ago it was okay to own other people, and years ago it was, these things, and now today we're more sophisticated. We've advanced. We know that there are things that are inherently evil, but where did that start? How do we dialogue with people on this in a way that doesn't build walls, but rather builds bridges?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like, the thing that I'm going to be trying to do with our kids before they get to college is talking to them about the different kind of ways that people try to figure out how do we determine right and wrong, right? So we've talked about moral relativism. There are some people that would just say that, like, right and wrong is based on what you feel is true, or maybe based on what, like, a culture thinks is true or something like that, but that's not a very common view anymore. Christians, we would typically fall under, like, what philosophers would call, like, deontological ethics. We believe that there are just some things that are absolutely or objectively right and wrong, regardless of opinion or anything else. There's another category of philosophy here that's important for teenagers to become more aware of. I was just teaching on this in Wisconsin last weekend, which is on utilitarianism, on consequentialism. There's this idea that you can determine objective right and wrong based on basically how can we increase the most net pleasure or decrease the most net suffering? Like, and we can determine things are right and wrong based on that. And that sounds like that's a very seductive view, because that makes a lot of sense on the surface until you're thinking about, well, gee, then why couldn't we, kidnap and murder homeless people so that we could use their organs to save 5 doctors' lives? Utilitarians don't have great answers to questions like that, but it's going to be so important for our kids to be thinking through those and understanding the distinctions between that and, Aristotelian worldviews, or kind of other ways of thinking through ethics before they get to school, when suddenly all of those really hard decisions are kind of happening. So if they can go into school already kind of understanding the differences between those things, that will be a massive head start. And I'll give a quick book recommendation. If anyone wants to kind of like this is not from a Christian source, all right? But this is coming from actually a really interesting TV comedian named Mike Schur. He wrote a lot of The Office. He was Mose on The Office.
Wow.
And whoever saw Dwight's, weird brother. That was Mike Schur being forced by his writer friends to wear a really itchy, uncomfortable outfit just because he hated it, kind of a thing. But he went on to do Parks and Rec, and then more importantly, he ended up writing a show called The Good Place, which is a lot about philosophy, and it kind of happened because he had this experience at like a Starbucks where he kind of knew that he did the wrong thing, and he just like couldn't stop thinking about it and trying to figure out why. And he basically ends up meeting a whole bunch of philosophy professors trying to understand these kind of big questions. And then he wrote kind of this easy to read book that's kind of it's like an intro to philosophy, an intro to, there's consequentialism and Aristotelian, virtue ethics and all of those things in a really kind of easy to read package. And it's sort of delightful. But you're not going to agree with all of it, and that's okay because we need to be preparing our teams to hear things that they're not going to agree with anyway. And now I'm so on a soapbox, stop me.
So no, and I think it's really, really true because a good parent prepares their kids for this. A good teacher prepares their students for that.
This is boot camp.
This boot camp. That's right. You're teaching them how to think, not just what to think.
Yes.
So
and how to think.
And how to think and how to be critical in your thinking and all these things. And that's why we do what we do, Josh. And we're not going to get through this list. We'll pick it up again, perhaps next episode or at some point in the future. But I do just want to challenge your brains. This is funny because I mentor some kids, and there's a kid I absolutely love. He's like my own kid, and he's 18, and he said, or he texted me actually. I listened to your podcast on critical thinking, and you bored me out of my mind.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thanks for your honest opinion. And I said, well, let me challenge you. Okay, go back and listen to him again, and focus. And he did
1.5 speed.
Yeah. And he came back and he said, yeah, absolutely. I think he was looking for, a fun conversation that was light and it was a little deeper than he thought. But that's the way. Sometimes you have conversations about politics in the office. Other times you have conversations about philosophy and utilitarianism. Yep. But also you need to be reminded from time to time that the office has philosophy in it, and you better be able to see it or you're going to be reprogrammed by it.
Okay, so our pro-life course, we have a 1-hour advanced philosophy module that's like only for talking to the top 1% of pro-choice people. It's like only if you're talking to philosophers, it's like, do you need this module? But this module has an entire section dedicated to the office. It's all office analogies. Yes, you can find philosophy anywhere.
See, and I love that. I used to teach a course, and I used a lot of Seinfeld in my course because that was in the 90s, and that was the popular. And now Seinfeld's not even politically correct on a lot of its episodes. But we digress. And as always, I want to say thanks so much for listening to us here at Life Talks. And we do sometimes go into the deeper issues, but we think you ought to be challenged. We also think you're smart enough to do some thinking on it. And so we're going to poke you there. And then also we're going to talk about nonsense on a different episode. So keep tuning in to us here at Life Talks. Until next time, thanks as always for joining us here at Life Talks.